The media plays an important role in society. It educates, informs, entertains, and raises awareness of the people, protects the interests of the people by serving as the critic of the government through their editorials. The Philippines press is considered to be the freest in Asia after suffering censorship, prosecution, intimidation, and attacks during martial law.
As of the 21st of this month, I signed Proclamation number 1081, placing the entire Philippines under martial law.
It is ranked 140th by the Reporters Without Borders Press Freedom Index in 2011. However, with freedom comes irresponsibility and abandonment, as sensationalism comes to play when news agencies try to outscoop one another. Thus, the rising number of libel cases of journalists in the country. What is libel? What are the grounds for a person, company, or organization to file a libel case against media personnel? If a journalist is sued for libel, what steps can they take to resolve it? Good evening, I am attorney Karen Jimeno, and you are watching Legal Help Desk on the Solar News Channel. This show is about making the law work for you by giving legal advice on topics that matter to you.
And I'm attorney Rod Nepomuceno. Tonight, we will be discussing your rights on the issue of libel. What you need to know and do when you are sued for libel by a person or a company, or if you want to sue someone for libel.
Yes.
Yan.
And
Quite
this is-
hot topic
yes,
now.
very hot topic, especially when the cybercrime law bill was being talked
I
about
know.
because there was a libel provision there.
Lalo in the light of the social media, no, there's a lot of talk going around in Twitter and Facebook and even in blogs, no, and a lot of it is negative. You just follow
Because it is really a threat or a risk to a lot of people because that's one of the essential factors of libel, that there has to be publication. But I think first, we have to define what's the difference between libel and slander. Kasi a lot of people also usually say it's libel when in fact, in reality, under the law, it's slander. So maybe we can
maybe you start off with the elements of libel.
Libel.
No?
Well, simply libel, it's a public and malicious imputation of a crime, a vice or defect, meaning if you call someone an alcoholic, that's a vice or a defect. It can be real or imaginary. So kahit totoo pa yan, it can be libelous if it is public and malicious. Malicious meaning walang good intention, walang justifiable motive.
And the tendency nga is, or the implication seems to be that you're planning, you're trying to blacken, discredit a person.
It causes the discredit, contempt, or dishonor of a person, or blacken the memory of someone who is dead.
Kahit namatay ka na.
Yes, so kunwari yung someone says something really bad, like imputes the commission of a crime na sinabi, for instance, someone's dead father, may nagprint sa newspaper that that father committed murder before, that can be libelous. Yes.
Ngayon, yun nga, what you were mentioning earlier, no, Karen, what is the difference between libel and slander? Maraming nalilito dyan. Well, basically, ang slander kasi is oral defamation. So it's oral. No? Ang libel kasi, if you see the revised penal code, if you read the revised penal code, talks about if you write, you know, in printing, lithography,
publication.
It's a publication or theatrical presentation. In other words, the rule now is that everything that's recorded is libel. No? So, for example, if I say something, it's oral. If I say something, it's oral, but it's recorded by television or by radio, that's libel.
Yeah. Also, Rod, not just recorded. Also, if you communicate it. Basta, the important thing is, if there's a third person who can hear it, or even letter, if I write a letter to you,
a private letter,
tapos, that's publication.
Correct.
Kunwari, if I'm imputing, again, vice, kunwari sinabi ko, babaero si yung isa naming kaibigan, and then you read it, that person can file a libel case against me. Or if even if that letter falls into the hands of someone and someone accidentally reads it, the other person can still file libel against me.
Very important point yan, Karen. So again, when we say public imputation, diba? Public imputation, it means just a third person, just one person, other than the person who was the subject of the defamatory remark, no? If another person finds out about it, that's automatically publication, and that's already a ground for libel. So now the other aspects done, Karen, is what is malice, di ba? Ano yung what is malice when it comes to defamatory?
That's hard to say just by definition because it's really a case-to-case basis. So the courts will look at the factual scenario, but basically, it's really when there's no good intention or justifiable motive for making a statement. Kunwari, gusto mo lang talagang siraan yung other person or you really just want to cause yung dishonor nila. So, kunwari, but if it's in accordance with, for instance, your job, you're doing it because of a legal or moral duty, then you can say that it's not malicious. Again, hindi mo lang basta pwede sabihin, no, it's because I'm a reporter. You really have to prove that there is no malice.
Yeah, the tough part here kasi is that, of course, constitutionally, we have to protect the right, the freedom of speech. No, we have to make that as a primary importance yun, no? Yung being able to express yourself. But the problem is sometimes, for example, you know someone in your office is cheating or kumukupit, no, and you have to tell someone, your boss, for example. And naturally, if you have to tell your boss, you're saying something that's defamatory to that person, regarding that person, pero it's part of your legal and moral duty to say that.
So I think in that case, it falls under one of the exceptions. Kasi there's really, as long as you say something defamatory, kunwari tinawag ko si Rod na babaero.
Babaero? Ano
That's presumed as libelous and malicious. So it's up to me as the defendant to prove that it was made in accordance with a justifiable motive or good intention.
Tapos yung important rin, Karen, to determine yung defense of truth, no? Kasi some people will say, well, totoo naman sinasabi ko eh.
Yes.
Totoo yung sinasabi ko, so dapat, yun yung parang defense ko, na it's true. But sometimes when you're imputing a particular act or condition, that's not a crime. If it's not a crime, kunyari, you're saying that that person is a homosexual and sleeps around with people of the same sex, regardless if that's true or not, that's not defense.
That's not an automatic defense. You have to prove that there's really no malice. Again, pag no malice, you have to show good intention and justifiable motive. And then, again, serious yung mga punishments dito ha. It's not just a fine. It has the penalty of imprisonment. So pwede kayo makulong because of libel.
Pwede. Although there's a rule now, there's administrative order now that may mga preferences on punishments.
Yes. No? This is Administrative Circular 08-2008 of the Supreme Court. Na if there are other circumstances which make the offense lighter. Kunwari, merong iba na libelous talaga yung offense, but then they found that it was one politician against another politician, and it was in the heat of the election campaign. So the Supreme Court said there na, under these instances, we'll just impose a fine instead of imprisonment.
Normally, fine lang. Tapos nun, it's if only in cases of insolvency, doon papasok yung punishment or imprisonment.
Now, Rod, let's answer a few questions from our viewers. Drew from Facebook asks, with the TRO on the anti-cybercrime law almost over, can you please explain how I can be sued for libel from blogs and social network accounts? So actually, Drew, you can be sued under the cybercrime law if the TRO is lifted, because there's a provision there which makes the libel law under the revised penal code applicable to any libelous statements made over a computer or through the internet. So if you say something libelous, meaning, again, defamatory siya, na nakakasira dun sa reputasyon or dun sa honor ng isang tao, then you can be sued for libel under the cybercrime law.
Yeah. And more often than not, it's really case to case, no? Kasi minsan, if you file a case, the judge will often have to determine if the malice is there, no? Obviously, like I said earlier, the Constitution still does protect freedom of expression, so you can express yourself. If it's a matter of opinion, let's say I find this restaurant, the food is not so good. You know, that's something that you have to. That's just an opinion. No? So, but later on we'll tackle that, no, with our guests. Now, our next question comes from Pipo, and he asks, "What if I wrote a review of a bad service? Oh, ito na pala. A review of a bad service from a restaurant, telecom, car service, etc. Can I get sued by the company for what I wrote?" Again,
yes,
that would depend.
It depends.
Depends on what you write. Yeah.
Again, kahit totoo pa yan, even if it's a really, really bad restaurant, but you wrote something that can cause their reputation to be destroyed. Again, libel can also be committed against corporations. So under the law, it can be committed against natural persons, meaning mga totoong tao, and against juridical persons like companies, corporations, partnerships. So be careful. But again, it's not automatic as long as it's in accordance with your duty as a reviewer, for instance, of restaurants or food. Then it's okay to write the truth. Na if they have bad service, it's bad service, bad food. But just be careful. Make sure that there's no malice. That you write in accordance with your duty as a reviewer.
Yeah. Okay. So
let's take a short break. Legal Help Desk will return after these reminders.
Pañares. I work for Manila Standard today. I'm currently covering the Malacanang beat. I got the libel case when I was 19 years old. That was in 2003. I was working back then for the Daily Tribune, and then we were working on a story on the EA3 on the issue involving Fraport. I was covering the Department of Transportation. That's why I was writing about that story. And then Pancho Villarasa of the firm felt that the stories that we wrote were libelous. So there, he filed a case against us. The article was, basically it underwent the editing process. So it went to an editor and a final look with the editor-in-chief. And there were some sentences perhaps that were included, not necessarily from our original draft. It was a double byline, I and Amita Ligaspi. There were some words like reference to him being a member of a certain fraternity, of being given preferential treatment. That's why they were able to corner the airport deal. They said it was malicious. It was horrible because I was fresh from college and I didn't want to tell my mom because I knew she would panic. And then I stayed with the Daily Tribune for 6 months. I learned that I had the case when I was already with Manila Standard. I wasn't too confident, you know. I didn't know how things went about because it was my first case. I didn't know if Tribune would shoulder the lawyer's fee or how they do things. And yun, primarily it has been very stressful for me because every time we have to go to the court, you know, you have to prepare, you have to brace yourself, and I mean, it's also financially draining. Just want it to end. I mean, you want the judge to make a ruling one way or the other because it's been like a decade since it's been filed. And somehow it's unnecessary burden to me as a reporter, unnecessary stress to me. Like if I have to go abroad, I have to present temporary liberty, that a certification that I have temporary liberty granted by the judge. I apply a visa and I have to check when they ask if you've ever been arrested. So it's, yun, ang sakit sa ulo.
You are still watching Legal Help Desk on the Solar News channel. We are now joined by Attorney Edward Chico. He is a partner at the Decano Law Office and a law professor at the De La Salle University College of Law, teaching criminal law and taxation. Welcome, Attorney Ed. So you've seen the case of Joyce, and
Yes.
this really made me realize kawawa rin sila. You know, we always say that ang kawawa yung mga nasusulat sa mga newspapers ng mga reporters, but actually they can really be harassed as well if they get charges of libel.
Exactly. I think this is the reason why many media practitioners right now are clamoring for decriminalization of libel.
Yes.
In fact, I understand some sectors are lobbying before Congress to institute the necessary amendment to the law so that libel will no longer be seen as a crime.
But then, do you really think that this law is, at the moment, the standards are too strict?
Well, if you talk about media practitioners as opposed to ordinary individuals, media practitioners would have an advantage to a certain extent.
Yeah.
Because right now, you have to understand that when you criticize, for example, a government official, and the criticism relates to the discharge of his official duty, the standard that is used to basically determine whether or not the statements are defamatory against a public official is clearly lesser than that which applies to an ordinary individual.
Yeah.
You mean
There's
by
a-
lesser, what are these standards?
But for
It's a-
example, the Supreme Court has been cautioning government officials not to be onion-skinned because media practitioners, since they are part of the media, di ba, they have this watchdog function. So definitely they will always have to criticize the government for any wrongdoing. So that's why government officials cannot just complain that just because a media practitioner attacks him, it necessarily translates
Yeah.
into a libel case.
No, it's very
Yeah.
rare. It's very rare kasi that the media practitioner will really go out and just say extremely bad things about the government official. No? Normally, it's through innuendo or parang it'll create suspicion.
Yung mga blind
yung mga
item na
blind
yan.
items,
That's
ganun.
also
Yeah.
libelous,
Yeah.
right?
So, yeah.
If you
Yeah.
can identify the person.
Yeah, first you can identify, of course, under the law now as it stands. You don't really have to name the person. But the question is if the leaders can readily know that you are basically pointing to a particular person. If you do not name that person, then definitely identity is already established.
Yeah.
Yung the aspect of truth, no? When it comes to public officials, when does that come into play? Kunyari, if you're a media practitioner and you're saying it's the truth anyway.
Okay, as discussed earlier, I was intently watching the two of you discussing brilliantly
Yeah, what you
the
expound on that.
issue. Well, as a general rule, you have to understand that whether or not the defamatory statements are true is immaterial. So it's not like you can go to court and say or present pieces of evidence that would establish the truth behind the allegation. So the court will not allow you to do that because it is inadmissible. However, proof of truth becomes admissible when the criticism, again, relates to a discharge of functions of a government official's office. So for example, you say that the mayor is not doing his job, that instead of going to the office,
going
he would
to
just go to the sabungan and gamble all day. If that is the case, you can argue before the court that that is true. And if you can convince the court and if you can present pieces of evidence to show that, coupled with, as we said, good motive and a noble purpose, then definitely that could be a valid defense. But as regards other issues, proof of truth is
It's
not
not.
really admissible. For example, you accuse the mayor of being a homosexual or that he has a same-sex relationship with another person. Even if that is true, that is immaterial.
Attorney Ed, I'd like to go back to the case of Joyce. So in this case, we have, she mentioned a partner in another law firm na involved dun sa sinulat niyang article. So that is not a government official. So in her case, what would be, for instance, her defenses, and then how can she defend herself from this libel case? Kasi I remember also this exception, di ba? There's a presumption that every defamatory statement is malicious, except a fair and true report. A fair and true report made in good faith without any remarks or comments. So in the case of Joyce, who has the burden of proving good faith, and ano yung pwede niyang defenses dito?
Okay. Well, unfortunately, we really don't know the exact details surrounding the case. So it basically depends on how she will argue her case. But I think if we talk about the elements of the crime of libel, all she has to do is rebut one element. If one element is absent, then definitely she cannot be held criminally liable.
Yeah, so here
for it.
definitely there's publication.
Yeah, there's
right?
publication
Oo.
because it was published in a
Yeah,
newspaper
and there's an
of general circulation. There's
identity, diba?
identity because the
Yeah.
person has been identified. So there are two elements which are very, very critical in our case. The first one is defamation. Let me just point this out. You have to understand that the person's right to freedom of speech is guaranteed by the Constitution. So that's why the courts are normally balancing the interests between the need to penalize the person and the need to protect her right to basically say anything she wants. I think the Supreme Court, in a long line of cases, has stated emphatically and even expressly that a mere expression of opinion is not necessarily libelous, particularly if the expression of opinion relates to an issue which adversely, negatively, deleteriously affects you. For example, I think Attorney Rod and I were discussing this earlier.
Yes.
You were disgusted with how the airline company is rendering its service.
Yes.
And you write about the airline company being the worst
Yeah, it's the
airline
worst
company.
airline, yeah.
And if that is the case, it may not be libelous per se, particularly if you can show that the circumstances will basically warrant you to say that out of sheer disgust.
What if you just say that it's the worst airline?
Well,
with no
but if that is the case, then it becomes libelous because, as I said, mere expression of opinion is all right for as long as that opinion relates to an issue that basically affects you. So, for example, in the case of, what's her name again? Joyce.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sometimes when you say that the government is unfairly or unjustly favoring this firm
particular
or
law
this
firm, yes.
particular law firm, I think it's not libelous per se if you couple it with good motive and
Yeah.
if you couple it with noble purpose, like it's in the performance of some civic social
And if you're
duty.
criticizing the government, basically that is a bad practice
Exactly.
to favor one law
Yeah,
firm.
kasi
So
if
that
you're-
can be maybe justified as not malicious in accordance
Exactly.
with
Yeah, but as I said, Attorney Karen, that is just a mere
Yeah.
opinion. But of course, it depends on how you say it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the moment you say something like, because this firm is very close
Yeah.
to the president, one partner from this firm was appointed as a Supreme Court justice, the other
Yeah.
was given this.
She was adding two and two together.
Yeah, exactly.
And how come this firm seems
Yeah.
to be getting these
Exactly.
favors? And if that's the case,
If that's the
then-
case, you're basically crossing
So
the line.
for people like Joyce, how can they at least, kasi sa kanya 19 years old pa lang siya when it was
Yeah.
filed. It was back in
2003.
2003.
So 10 years ago.
It's been, eight now, going 9 years.
Yeah.
How can they speed up the resolution of these cases? Because for her, it's really a problem kung magta-travel siya. Can they ask for for instance, compromise agreement for this libel case?
Well, to be honest about it, a criminal case could not be subject of a compromise. But definitely, if both parties can reach for an amicable settlement, normally the private complainant will simply execute an affidavit of desistance.
Yeah.
And the case could no longer prosper, not because it is made subject of a compromise, but because the prosecutor no longer has any pieces of evidence to present,
Yeah.
because the main witness is no longer available. But in the case of Joyce, kasi it's been pending for several years. So what can she do? It actually depends on her lawyer now. You have to understand that under the rules, that the court is supposed to facilitate the proceedings. But at the end of the day, considering the volumes of cases,
You can
a
sometimes you
court,
don't blame-
yes, exactly,
can't blame
takes
the
all
court,
kinds of-
no?
You cannot blame the court. And sometimes it even takes several years, like 10 or even
Yeah.
12 years.
Oo.
I even have a case for bouncing check, which is merely BP 22 violation. And I think it was filed in 2001. And it's now 2012, and we're still at the pre-trial stage.
Yeah.
For crying out
Yeah.
loud.
No,
diba?
no.
So
Let me.
here.
Sorry.
So
Go ahead.
one thing I'd also want to talk about right now, before we end our discussion, is for victims, yung period when they should file a case for libel, because there's really a limitation to this, right? Yung 1 year and 6 months. So for those of you, if you have, for instance, a libel case that you think you've been a victim of libel, you have to file this within 1 year, right? 1 year from the time of the publication.
Yeah, the alleged publication
Yes.
of the defamatory or libelous article or material.
And then, where can we file cases of libel?
Actually, it's not really very costly to do that because it's a criminal case. All you have to do is get in touch probably with the lawyer to file an affidavit, a complaint affidavit before the fiscal. And once the fiscal determines existence of probable cause, he will file an information before the trial court and the prosecutor becomes your lawyer. So it's free because you have to understand when you commit an offense, you're committing an offense against the state. So that's why the prosecutor is there to basically represent you.
Right. Now, in the case of Joyce, lastly, no, the case of Joyce, she was a reporter for a newspaper. No? Now, what if you're a reporter for, let's say, an online investigative journalism website, let's say Rappler? Is there any difference now?
Well, that's exactly the problem right now.
Cybercrime law.
Yeah,
It can
exactly.
be-
Yeah, but the weight of authority right now seems to treat the internet separately from the other forms of media. And that is the reason why we even have the anti-cybercrime law now. Because the idea is that when the provision on libel was enacted, the lawmakers did not contemplate the possibility of the internet ever
Yeah.
existing.
This is a very old
yeah.
law. Kaya nga yung mga fines, pag binasa mo, 200
200
pesos, 2,000 pesos.
Yan.
So, unfortunately, we're running out of time, but be careful, people. We're talking about libel, and again, as we were discussing, any publication, kahit sumulat ka pa ng private letter to someone, if it is defamatory, ibig sabihin nasisiraan mo yung isang tao, and someone accidentally reads it, you can be sued for libel. And also, make sure na if you're a blogger or reporter, even if it's a blind item, if you can tell based on the description, the identity of that person, then you can also be sued for libel. So again, let's balance freedom of expression, free speech, with responsibility in order to avoid being sued for libel.
Right. Okay. So that's all the time we have for today. Unfortunately, we'd like to thank Attorney Chico for joining us. Thank you, Attorney Ed, for joining us tonight, discussing with us the issue of libel. I'm Attorney Rod Nepomuceno.
And I am Attorney Karen Jimeno. Join us again next Monday for another round of discussion as we talk about your legal rights on the issue of illegal recruitment. Good night.